And now, marine weather around Alaska. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather. As we go through Tuesday and Wednesday and into the midweek period, it's going to be rather stormy across the Gulf. But in the meantime, we are continuing to watch the early season ice develop across the far north Arctic areas, but we continue to have areas of heavy freezing spray as the result of a high pressure sitting up in the central Arctic Ocean and brisk east-northeasterly winds along the Arctic coast, and also even extending down into areas of Kotzebue Sound, north side of Seward Peninsula, and into eastern Norton Sound. There could also be some areas of heavier freezing spray, and you can see early ice development getting as far south as areas of the southwest coast from along the outer Yukon Delta down through Etolan Strait and into Kuskokwim Bay. So the big weather story will be this developing storm. By late tonight, early Tuesday morning, double barrel low. The main low is the southern piece of energy I was talking about yesterday that's going to ride along the Aleutian chain and then emerge in the North Pacific just on the Pacific side there of the Alaska Peninsula and begin to deepen down to near 970 millibars. It's going to have a frontal system out ahead of it with a secondary front back approaching the lower southwestern Gulf, and this low is going to take a track northeastward just along and off the Kenai coast up toward Prince William Sound. Computer models are having some issues as to exactly where that final track will be, which will make a big difference in terms of snow amounts in some areas, but it is going to bring heavier rainfall right along the immediate coast. Whittier and Seward could pick up as much as 5 to 6 inches of snow. 5 to 6 inches of rain from later Tuesday night through Thursday morning. And there will be gale and even storm force winds along this front as it progresses toward the Panhandle. There are high wind watches in effect for southern parts of the Panhandle, and I'll show you the winds and waves coming up here. By Wednesday afternoon, we have a low center there just to the southeast of the Seward Peninsula with another piece of energy tailing to the south of there that's going to kind of rotate up into the Panhandle and northeastern Gulf Coast. And this is yet another weather system. We'll take a similar track here late in the week by Friday into Saturday. That by Wednesday afternoon, there'll be another low out there in the western Aleutians that'll be taking a similar track and then moving up into the Gulf late in the week. But in the meantime, Tuesday, look for south winds across the inner channels with gusts as high as 35 knots, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, waves building upwards around 3-4 feet. Outer coast, generally south winds to 20 knots with waves 7 to 8 feet, but look what happens Wednesday as that strong front approaches, and we're going to see southeasterly winds, gale force gusts 35-40 knots all throughout the inner channels with waves building 5 to 6 feet as high as 14 feet Dixon entrance. And then look at the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles of the outer coast. Look for southeast to east gales of 40 to 45 knot, 50 knot storm force winds just off of Cape Suckling with waves building upwards of 20 to perhaps as high as even 30 feet in some areas there as you get out offshore of Cape Suckling. Now the northwestern Gulf, where the low is going to track up into on Tuesday, southeast winds 20 knots, Prince William Sound waves 3-4 feet there. Northeast winds along the upper portion of Cook Inlet that will be increasing to 30 and 35 knots near the entrance. These winds are going to be shifting though as that low pivots up into this region Tuesday night. 30 to 35 knots during the daylight hours of Tuesday, but the strongest winds will actually impact this area here Tuesday night. There could be certainly at the very least gale and even low-end storm force winds. And then by the time we get into Wednesday with the low center in this vicinity, we expect easterly storm force winds of 50 to 55 knots outside of Hinchinbrook entrance and off of Cape Suckling with waves building 20 to 24 feet in height. 40 knot east winds with 10-foot waves there in the more open areas of Prince William Sound, and then north winds to 30 to 35 knots along the length of Prince William Sound with waves 8-9 feet there in the upper reaches of Cook Inlet, but as high as 12 feet down toward the entrance. Kodiak Island on Tuesday will see easterly winds 30 to 40 knots there within Shelikof Strait. Waves as high as 13 feet. And the outer coast east of Chiknik, you can see 40-knot gales out of the east with gusts to 50 knots or 60 miles an hour equivalent. And as we go down along the North Pacific side, east to north winds, 35-knot gales with waves of 9 to 10 feet. For Wednesday, winds turn more northerly across Kodiak Island at 25 knots, and then along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, we anticipate northwest winds right around 30 knots, 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side, and as high as 8 to 12, even 13 feet on the Bering side. Now, for Tuesday, in the wake as that deeper low takes shape just to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, we're expecting north-northwest winds, 35 to 40-knot gales extending through the eastern and central Aleutians before falling off to 20 to 25 knots west of Adak. Waves in the North Pacific side running 10 to as high as 17 feet and as high as 13 to 18 feet, especially there just southwest of Nikolsky on Tuesday. And then for Wednesday, winds across the eastern Aleutians will generally be west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots, but they'll shift around back to the southwest, especially west there of Kiska at 35 knots in advance of the next low. And waves across the western Aleutians generally 10 to maybe as high as 15 feet. For the southwest coast, look for northeasterly winds to 30 knots out of Bristol Bay, 6-foot waves there, but we have northwest winds to 30 knots at the Pribilof Islands because there is a low center, a diminishing low center in this region, and northeast winds to 15 knots out of Norton Sound and along the outer Yukon Delta with waves of 3 to 4 feet. For Wednesday, look for north-northwest winds, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays, waves 5-6 feet. Northeast winds 25 knots there within the broader open waters of Norton Sound with 5-foot waves, and then north-northwest winds 15 knots off of Hooper Bay. For the areas south of the Bering Strait, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots on Tuesday, waves 2 to 4 feet. East winds generally Cape Lisburne southward 10 to 15 knots in the lower Chukchi Sea, but the stronger winds, 35-knot easterly gales, will continue from Wainwright on up to Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, and if there's any open water, waves could be running as high as 6 to 8 feet. And for Wednesday, winds come down maybe slightly here, but not much, 30-35 knots out of the east along the Arctic coast with 7-foot waves where there may be some open water, but stronger winds here in the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast to 40 knots there, especially near and west of Cape Lisburne with waves of 7 to 10 feet. And then through the Bering Strait, look for northeast winds at 20 knots, turning more northerly with waves running 4 to 6 feet.